Hi, Megan here. I've had a lot of people ask how to finish off a Kumihimo braid with or without beads, an 8-strand braid on the round disc, and how to use a bead cap and a wire to finish it off rather than gluing the bead cap on. I prefer this method rather than relying solely on glue to keep the bead cap on. Here's one side of a finished piece. There's a toggle clasp attached to a wire wrapped loop with a little bead, and then the bead cap before you get into the braid. And these are size 8 round seed beads making up the braid here, and it goes on into the cap a little bit too. So I'll go over how to wire wrap this wire onto the cords. I'll do a little bit of braiding just to make a very short sample, and then I'll show you how to finish it with the cut ends of cord. I'm going to be using a couple pieces of just craft wire. This is 22 gauge, I think. You want to use a gauge that's slightly thick so that when you make your wire wrapped loop, it doesn't sink back into the hole in the bead cap. And it's also going to be holding your clasp on, so you don't want it so thin that it might break. I've got the other side of my toggle clasp. I also have some hypo cement glue. It's good for gluing anything that you need to be flexible once it's dried. So it's not like super glue that dries hard and crusty and gross. Depending on the type of cord you use, you wouldn't necessarily have to use glue. You could heat seal the ends if you're using something that's acrylic, like s-lon or c-lon cord. But we will only use this on one side, on the cut end. At the beginning, we won't need to glue anything down. I'm going to make a wire wrapped loop on one end of one of your pieces of wire. Doesn't have to be too far from the top because you'll want the rest of this wire to work with to attach your clasp to it once you're done. So you'll make a wire wrapped loop. It needs to be big enough to accommodate your cords, but it doesn't have to be gigantic because it does have to fit into your bead cap. So you make a wire wrap loop, but before you completely close it and wrap the wire around it, open it up a little bit so it's kind of swung open. There we go. And you're going to pop it down into the middle of the disc so that the loop passes over all of those 4 threads, and the long tail piece is coming out from the bottom of the disc. So there it is. And you'll want it to kind of grab onto all the threads. And it's a little hard to get them all in there, but once they're all in, there we go. Once they're all in the loop, you'll then use your pliers, and it is a little awkward. Hold the loop steady and wrap the wire around the longer piece of wire at least once. It doesn't have to be pretty on this side because this is going to go into the bead cap. And be aware that I am holding this Kumihimo disc upside down. I'm going to work this side up only so it keeps the video less cluttered. It's probably a little confusing, sorry about that. So I have wrapped this piece of wire, completed the loop. I'm going to tighten up these cords again because they loosened up a little bit while I was doing that. And now I can go in and snip off this short piece of wire. And I'll worry about tucking the end of the wire in later, but for now we just needed it out of the way. You can straighten the wire up a little bit and clean it up towards the end of your project. But for now, you just needed this wire wrapped loop to hold onto all of these cords at the same time. So now you can start braiding as you normally would. I'm going to do that off camera so I don't bore you to death, and then I'll come back and finish off the other side. All right, so I've made a very small 8 warp braid using size 8 rounds. And you can see this wire wrap loop that we made at the beginning starting to emerge. It is a little crooked, but I can clean that up once the other end's tied off. So now we have this end. We need to attach this wire wrapped loop in here somehow. I've made and completed a wire wrapped loop, as you can see. You want to wrap around the stem, the little neck, at least one full wrap, but probably no more than maybe 1 or 1.5 wraps, because if you wrap down really long below your loop, it just makes the distance between your beaded braid and your bead cap that much longer, and it can kind of sit funny. So just make a really efficient short wrap, because this end's going to go down into the bead cap. Now the last pass around, I did not add a bead because that locks in more or less the beads that are already there, so that when you add on the wire, they don't slide off. So now I'm going to deal with, and I've taken my weight off of this end, I'm going to deal with basically 2 strands at a time on this side as if they were one strand. I'm going to hold them together as if they were one strand. And we're going to make a square knot, which is left over right and then right over left, using these strands, so that there's a knot right here where this loop will be attached, and then there'll be this long piece of wire sticking out so we can add our cap to that. So the first thing you'll need to do is take off these 2 and hold them together as if they were one strand. And you're going to pass them both together, held together. You're going to put them through the loop, like so. And then you're going to take the 2 strands from the opposing side of the disc, hold them together, 2 together as if they're one strand, and you're going to put them through the loop going the other direction. So they sort of crisscross inside the wire wrapped loop, and then you'll pull to shorten them up. Okay. So I'll bring it up so you can kind of see what's going on. You've got the 2 from each side going through opposite directions. Okay. You're going to shorten it down fairly close just by pulling the strands. And now you're going to tie just by an overhand knot, and just pull the strands through this loop. Just once. And again, just like the other side, this part that's right against the beadwork is not going to look pretty, but it's going to be hidden by the bead cap, so that's okay. What we want to focus on is it being secure. So I've turned it around just for the sake of me being able to see what I'm doing. I'm pulling off 2, just repeating this, pulling off these 2 strands that were on the disc. Gonna hold them together as if they were one strand. And you do have a lot of like wild and crazy strands going on at this point, so you kind of have to just watch what you're doing and don't take a break and come back at this point. Do it all at once. So now I'm going to put these strands through the loop. And they can be a little tricky if you need to use a big eye needle to do this, by all means. Okay, so off camera I put the other 2 strands through. So these are the last pairs of strands. I already made the one half of the square knot with the first 2 pairs of strands, and now I've got the other 2 pairs of strands through the loop, and I'm just going to do another overhand knot, or not an overhand knot, the second half of the square knot. Knot. Okay, just pull it tight. So you're gonna have like a messy stacked knot right up against this wire wrapped loop. So there's the wire wrapped loop and there's this like messy bit of knots under there. To secure them, you could either trim them kind of close and use a lighter to be careful. Use a lighter or a match to heat seal the ends until it sort of sears together. Or I prefer, because I can have more control over it, I just use the hypo cement or any kind of clear jewelry glue. And I'm going to completely cover the knot and all the strands, just cover it in glue. Let it dry a couple minutes before I trim the excess cord off of this side. But I can go ahead and show you on this other end, the first end that I did, I didn't need to glue or anything like that. I'm going to straighten up this head pin a little bit, or the wire wrap loop a little bit. It's kind of crooked. And this is the time where you can do that, because the other end is more or less finished and it's not going to come loose on you. So all I'm doing is just tightening up the wire wraps a little bit, just so they're not too terribly tall, because again it's going inside the bead cap. And now on this end, you can take a bead cap if I can find where it went. It fell off of my table. Oh, it rolled away. Here we are. So bead cap again, or not again, but for the something to emphasize. Finding bead caps to fit your Kumihimo ends with beads is a little tricky. I liked going to a bead shop and just having my finished piece like this and just take it with you to size it. Because if you buy online, different companies tell you different diameters, and that might be the outer diameter, or the inner diameter, or something in between, and that may not fit right. You need to find one that fits comfortably over your beads like that. And you can kind of squish it down on there a little bit if it feels loose. See, that ugly wire wrap is hidden now, yay. Then you need one little bead to go down onto your wire. And now you're going to make a wire wrapped loop on this side, onto which you can attach the clasp of your choice. You want to make it a tight wire wrapped loop because you don't want this cap to slide up and down. It needs to be snug. You can wire wrap the clasp directly onto the piece like I'm doing, or you could use a jump ring and like put an extender or whatever you want to do. But I like putting the clasp right up against it so that the distance that my clasp takes up isn't way too long. So make a little wire wrap and you'll trim off your excess wire. So now you have a clasp wire wrapped onto one end of your piece. On this side you'll do the same thing. Just make sure that you glue or seal off all of these cords before you cut them out of the way. And don't be shy with the glue. If you're using glue, use a lot of glue because it'll get covered up by this bead cap. And you'll do the exact same thing. You'll put a bead cap on once your cords are cut, and you'll wire wrap the clasp on just like this side, and you'll be all done. Hooray! I hope I've solved some mysteries for some of you guys on how I like to wire wrap clasps onto an 8-strand braid of Kumihimo. If you've got questions, please let me know in a comment and I'll do my best to answer them. Happy beading! Bye bye!